The first time Jonas used that word, I was standing at the kitchen sink with my hands in cold water and a dishcloth going gray from too many washes. He came in from the barn, pulled off his boots, sat down at the head of the table, and said it the way he said everything, quietly, without looking up. He said, "This is how it has always been done, Martha. This is our tradition." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't ask which tradition he was talking about. I just dried my hands on my apron and nodded, the way a woman nods when she already knows that the question would cost more than the silence. That was the first time. It would not be the last. And what I did not know yet, what I would spend 7 years learning, is that the word tradition, inside a closed community, can mean almost anything. It can mean the way you hang your wash. It can mean the hour you serve supper. And it can mean something else entirely. Something that has nothing to do with heritage and everything to do with keeping a woman in a shape that is convenient for the men around her. I believed him for years, and the believing was the most expensive thing I have ever done in my life. Before I go any further, I want to say something honest to you. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now have not subscribed yet. And every time I think about that, I think about all the women sitting alone somewhere, at a kitchen table, in a car in a parking lot, in the dark on a phone, who are listening to these stories and not yet knowing that they are allowed to stay. If anything I have ever said on this channel made you feel seen, even for one moment, please subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it keeps these stories alive for the next woman who needs them. And while you are here, I want to ask you something in the comments. Was there ever a word someone used to keep you in place? A word that sounded right but felt wrong every time you heard it? Tell me below. I read every single one. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where the stories that were never supposed to leave the community finally get spoken out loud. I grew up old order Amish in eastern Ohio, the third daughter of a man who believed that a quiet household was a godly one, and the granddaughter of a woman who worked every day of her life until she could not anymore, and never once complained, because complaining was also, apparently, a tradition. I married Jonas when I was 19 years old. He was 23. He had good hands and a serious way of moving through a room, and a reputation as a man who would not give you trouble. That was the highest praise a young Amish man could receive. Not that he was kind, not that he was funny, not that he made a room feel warmer, just that he would not give you trouble. I thought that was enough. I thought that was, in fact, a great deal. The tradition Jonas referred to that first day had to do with money. Every dollar from every egg sold, every jar of jam taken to market, every piece of furniture his father's woodshop sold, all of it passed through the husband's hands. Not because the women could not be trusted with it, not because there was any law saying so, but because that was how it had always been done. I had grown up watching my own mother hand her garden earnings to my father at the end of every season. I had watched my aunts do it. I had watched the bishop's wife do it at the fall market, passing her coin purse across the table as naturally as breathing. So when Jonas said it, I believed him. Every woman I had ever known had shown me that this was simply the shape of a married life. You work, he holds. You ask when you need. That is the tradition. What I did not understand then is that a tradition is not the same as a truth. A tradition is just a thing that has been done long enough that people have stopped asking why. The second tradition had to do with the evenings. After supper was cleared and the children were in bed, Jonas would sit in the front room for 1 hour before bed. That was his time, his rest. I learned quickly, without ever being told directly, that this hour was not mine to enter, not with questions, not with problems. If I walked in, Jonas would not tell me to leave. He would simply stop responding, looking at the dark window, the wood grain of the floor, and he would wait until I left. I learned to carry my worries into the kitchen and leave them by the dish soap until morning. Everyone told me this was simply how men needed to rest, that it was a husband's right, that a good wife understood this. But here is the thing I have thought about many times since. The evenings were also my only quiet hour. After the children, after the clearing, after the last round of the house, that was the only time I had that was not already spoken for. And I was in the kitchen, and he was in the chair, and neither of us ever said that out loud. Because it was tradition, and tradition does not ask to be examined. I want to tell you about a woman named Esther. She was 10 years older than me, married to a cousin of Jonas's, and she had a way of appearing at the edges of your life at exactly the moments when your life needed interrupting. She came by one afternoon in November of my 3rd year of marriage, when I had not slept more than 4 hours together in longer than I could count. She sat at my kitchen table and watched me for a while, with the careful watching that older women in our community had learned, the kind that takes in everything without appearing to look at anything. Then she said, "Do you know what I thought when I was new?" I said no. She said, "I thought tradition meant something had been tested and found to be good. I thought if everyone was doing it, that meant it was working." She paused. She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. She said, "It took me a long time to learn that some things get passed on not because they work, but because the people they work for are the ones doing the passing." I stood at the counter with a baby on my hip and felt that sentence go through me like cold water in January. Not painful exactly, more like a sudden waking up. She did not say anything else about it. She finished her coffee, asked about the baby, admired the quilt draped over the back of the chair, and left as quietly as she had come. But I could not stop thinking about what she had said, about who does the passing, about who decides what is kept and what is let go. In our community, the traditions that survived were almost always the ones that made the men's lives easier and the women's lives smaller. That was not something anyone said out loud. It was just something you could see if you stood still long enough and let yourself look. The third tradition was the hardest one. Jonas called it the tradition of the husband's authority. He did not use those exact words often, but it was underneath every conversation we had about anything that mattered. It was in the way he handled disagreements, not by arguing, not by explaining, but simply by deciding and then waiting for me to come around. He was patient about it. He never raised his voice. He never said anything cruel. He would simply act as if the discussion were already over, and eventually, because there was no other path, it would be. He told me when I tried to bring things up again that a husband's leadership in the home was not just preference. It was scripture. It was community. It was tradition. And I believed him. I believed him the way you believe something when every voice around you is saying the same thing and you have no other voices to weigh it against. My mother believed it. My sisters believed it. The bishop preached it. The bishop's wife lived it. The older women at church repeated it to the younger ones like something sacred. A wife supports. A husband leads. That is the shape of a godly home. What I did not have back then was language for what I was experiencing. I did not have words for what it means to live inside a structure designed by someone else for someone else's benefit, and then handed to you as though it were a gift. I did not have words for what happens to a person when her opinions are treated, year after year, as a kind of interference. I did not have words for what slowly builds at the back of your mind when you spend enough years saying yes to things that feel like no. I got those words later, one at a time, from the outside in. I left when my youngest was 4 years old. I will not tell that whole story today because it belongs to another video. But I will tell you the moment it started to shift. It started the winter before I left, when Jonas came in from the barn and told me he had decided to take on a second parcel of land from his uncle. He told me this not as a question or a conversation, but as information being delivered to someone who would need to adjust accordingly. More mornings, more to manage, less help. He looked at me in that calm, certain way of his and said, "This is how we grow, Martha. This is what our fathers did. This is tradition." And something in me, something small and quiet that had been sitting very still for a very long time, finally moved. I looked at him and I thought, whose tradition? Because my grandmother had worked herself thin on a farm just like this one, and no one had called her labor a tradition. My mother had given 30 years of her mornings to a household that did not carry her name. The women in our community had been pouring themselves into this particular tradition for generations, and the tradition looked well-fed and rested, and they did not. I did not say any of this to Jonas that day. I was not ready yet. But I held it like a stone in a pocket all through the winter and into the spring and on through the long, slow months that followed, until I understood that a tradition is only as good as what it costs to keep it. And I had been paying long enough. The leaving was quiet. The shunning that followed was cold the way Amish silences always are. Not loud, but total. My mother did not write. My sisters found reasons to be busy. My father, the last time I saw him, looked at me the way he looked at a field that had come up wrong. Esther had prepared me for this, in her sideways way, the afternoon she sat at my kitchen table. She had told me that the community closes around what leaves it, the way water closes around a stone. She had told me it would feel like drowning from the outside. She was right. But she had also told me that on the other side of the closing, there was open air. She said she knew this not from leaving herself, but from watching others who had. She believed it the way she believed things she had not yet seen, with a quiet faith that had more to do with what she had observed inside the system than with anything she had read. She was right about that too. In the years since, I have learned the names for the things that happened inside my marriage. My therapist gave them to me one at a time, the way you hand something fragile to a person who is not sure they can hold it. Coercive control dressed in the language of Scripture. Isolation made to feel like faithfulness. Authority kept in place not through cruelty, but through the patient repetition of a single word, until that word became the only reality you could see. Tradition. 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 Jonas was not a bad man. I believe that clearly, and I have thought about it for a long time. He was a man who had been handed a script and followed it faithfully, the way faithful men in our community were taught to do. He had been told his authority was sacred, that a wife's resistance was a spiritual problem, that the shape of our life together had been tested by generations and found to be good. He believed all of it. And because he believed it, and I believed it, and every person around us believed it, we lived inside it, without either of us ever asking what it was costing the person it had not been designed for. The system is the thing, not the man. The system that calls control a tradition and calls submission a virtue. The system that passes itself on through mothers and grandmothers and bishops and kitchen table conversations, so that by the time a 19-year-old girl stands at a sink with her hands in cold water, the tradition is already inside her, already shaping her silence before anyone has to say a word. If you are living inside a tradition that only asks things of you and never for you, I want you to hear this. That is not tradition. That is just a name for someone else's convenience. A real tradition gives back what it takes. A real tradition makes room for every person inside it, not just the ones who benefit most from the rules. And a no that has been made too expensive to say out loud is still a no. It is just one that has been buried under years of being told, it is a sin. I think about Esther often, about that afternoon at my kitchen table and the quiet way she handed me the one sentence that changed how I saw everything. I think about all the women who are still sitting in kitchens right now, being handed the word tradition the way I was handed it, gently, firmly, repeatedly, as if the word itself were a kind of answer. I am telling this story for them, because somewhere in the long, unbroken line of women who were handed this tradition and asked to carry it without complaint, there has to be one voice that says, wait, let's look at this. Let's ask who built it and who it was built for. And let's ask, honestly, what it would cost to put it down. Your questions are not a betrayal. Your tiredness is not a door for the devil. Your no is not a sin. And the tradition that told you otherwise, the one repeated so many times it started to sound like the voice of God, was never as sacred as it wanted you to believe. It was just a very old agreement made by people who are no longer here, asking you to pay a price they never had to pay themselves. Before you go, I want to thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I know there are so many places your time could have gone today, and you spent it here, with this story. That means more to me than I can easily say. And I want to be honest, more than 90% of the people who watch these videos still have not subscribed. If this story sat with you, if it names something you have been carrying without a name for it, please subscribe. It is completely free, and it is how these stories keep reaching the women who need them most. And before you leave, tell me in the comments, was there ever a tradition in your life that turned out to be something else entirely? I want to know. I want to read it. Until next time, remember this. A word repeated long enough starts to sound like the truth. But you are allowed to ask when it started. You are allowed to ask who it serves. And you are allowed to decide that some things were never yours to carry in the first place.